You have money for a hamburger, but you want filet. And then the misconception is it's the designer's job to make filet out of hamburger, but it's not.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie.
I'm Amy, and this is Clever. Today, we're talking to Cory Grosser. Cory Grosser is an architect, product designer, educator, and chief of a boutique multidisciplinary design agency. The agency, Cory Grosser and Associates, is based in Pasadena but global in reach, having produced work for Disney, Ford, Samsonite, Hyundai, and Bentley, among others, as well as recently opening an outpost in Dubai.
A professor at Art Center, Cory is active in educating and shaping the next generation of designers, and himself. So let's talk to Cory.
My name's Cory Grosser. I live in Pasadena, California, and I own a design studio. We do architecture, we do furniture and products, and we do graphics and strategy. I think I do it because it's all I ever wanted to do. And I think I'm pretty good at it, and it just seems to be my passion.
Well, all right. Well, if it's all you ever wanted to do, we want to deconstruct that a little bit and go all the way back to the beginning. Let's get the lowdown on your upbringing.
Sure.
Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like? We always like to hear about your family dynamic and what kinds of things fascinated you as a kid.
Yeah, if you looked in the dictionary and looked up like all American kid, I think you would see me. That was kind of my upbringing. I grew up in a small town called Fairport. It's outside of Rochester, New York, where Kodak and Xerox are or were. And, I think I had a pretty idealized kind of childhood. In high school, I played football and I had a flat top and, I gave my girlfriend a varsity jacket. And so it was, I think, very, very middle America.
Oh my gosh. Did you sweat apple pie out of your pores?
A little bit. No, but it was actually a great place to grow up. It's so different now with my kids out here in LA, but we used to run around and bike ride and up and down the street. And I would show up at my friend's house and walk in the front door like I was part of the family. And it's just different now. But it was a good place to grow up. I liked to build things when I was a kid. And my grandfather gave me a set of blocks when I was very young, probably 3 or 4. And I would play with them all the time in my room. And I think maybe someone at some point said, hey, you should be an architect. And so from that moment on, which is longer than I remember, I was like, okay, I'll be an architect. That sounds pretty cool. That sounds good. So I think somewhere along the line, someone put that bug in my ear, and I guess it just kind of stuck.
Well, obviously it stuck, but then you had to grow it somehow. And did you have parents that were supportive of that idea? What did your parents do? And did you have siblings? What's the dynamic like at home? It sounds pretty wholesome, but things are never as they seem.
No, they're not. Sure. So, my mom owned a ballet studio. She was a professional ballerina before I was born. And my dad was a salesman, or still is. And I have one brother. He's a very smart guy, a scientist. He works for Merck Pharmaceuticals, and he lives in Princeton, New Jersey. But my mom was super passionate about dance and ballet and also teaching. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a huge influence in my life. And I think my father, I would say he really wanted my brother and I to do the best that we possibly could. And so it was a household where we were pushed to do our best, I think. And that was kind of how it came along. When I was a kid, I played football, of course, hence the varsity jacket. And then I ski raced in the winter. So it's cold there and it's snowy and there's not a lot to do in the winter. So my brother and I got into ski racing, and my parents would take us on the weekends all around the state of New York to race. And that was kind of how our winters went. I encourage, for my kids, if they can find sports or music or something that they're into and to have a passion outside of school. And I think, my parents expected that I would also do well in school. And so I tried.
So besides the sports, how does your creativity come out? Were you making things when you had time? Were you drawing? Do you have any stories about things you made or experiences you had that were more of the creative spirit, I guess.
Yeah, I was thinking about this a little bit. And since we're close to Halloween, we did this weird thing as a family when I was a kid. We would enter like Halloween costume making competitions. And my mom, who I think, is really creative, and she's kind of like a maker, I would say, or was a maker at the time. We would make these elaborate Halloween costumes, and then there would be a parade in the center of town or whatever. And I have someplace in a box, there's a whole pile of trophies from her winnings. So, for example, one Halloween, they took a 50-gallon drum and painted it red, and then very carefully drew the Coca-Cola symbol on, and I put my shoulder pads on from Pee Wee football. And, I walked in this parade as a bottle of Coca-Cola. So each Halloween, we definitely kind of had this experience where we made things. And I think besides that, the big influence for me throughout my career and what probably kept me going was my grandfather. And he was a machinist. And, this is such a new term, this idea of the maker, but he was definitely a maker. And when I was a kid, I don't know if you guys remember, there was that plastic car bed that you could have. It was kind of rotationally molded plastic, and you would put your mattress in.
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Yeah, you'd buy it at Toys R Us. But I didn't have anything like that. I had like a custom wood boat bed, bells, whistles, working lights, a kind of a front end that opened up to become my toy box. So, I think I was around that kind of making idea from a small age.
Yeah. And getting celebrated for it. It sounds like if you have a box full of trophies and you grew up in a boat bed, it sounds like that was something that was very valued in your home. So I have a quick question about your adolescence. Did you have to struggle between being kind of a jock and a creative person who liked to dress up?
It's funny, no. And I think it's served me well throughout my life, but I just think I'm kind of one of these people that can kind of blend in with the crowd.
Yeah.
I can talk football, or, we can talk minimal artist or whatever. I'm pretty comfortable in different social situations, I would say. And
are you comfortable sharing your deepest thoughts and feelings?
Usually.
Well, no, that's good. No, and I said that sort of jokingly, but I mean, I do think there's a real value to being sensitive and being comfortable with that and able to sort of navigate that space as well as, talking sports and design.
Well, I cried profusely at my brother's wedding when I was the best man. So it was a very snot-full occasion. So.
Sweetheart.
But yeah, I think I'm a relatively sensitive person, I suppose. I think as I grow older, and I suppose we can talk about it more as we get into work and design, but I think the most important word for me in my vocabulary now, both as a teacher and as a designer, is this idea of empathy, trying to put yourself in other people's shoes. And I take it really seriously, but I think, it's taken a long time to get there.
Mm. So you were interested in architecture, thought you wanted to be an architect. You were building these or making these really wonderful costumes with your family. And then at some point, you were ready to go off to college, and you studied architecture at the State University of New York in Buffalo, and then industrial design at Art Center. But I guess I want to know a little bit more about what that path was like for you. Did you have mentors? Were there people you looked up to? Basically, what were your college years like studying all of those things?
So I think it's kind of when this all started to turn for me. But as I said, I think I just accepted that I was going to be an architect. I don't know. And that was just the thing. So it was always the plan. And I took, classes in high school, drafting and what they called pre-engineering, which really was kind of a design class, but they didn't call it that. And, architecture seemed like the thing if you wanted to do design or you wanted to be creative, that was a good path. And Buffalo is the only school in New York that has architecture that's a public university. So, it was an hour and a half from my house. And so that's where I went. And then a funny thing happened during architecture school, I think was maybe a pivotal moment in my career. I was in Buffalo and I saw getting to design cool buildings seemed like it was for old men.
Ah.
And I think the people that I met were all old and, they had spent a career working up to it. And I think I was a pretty impatient kid, I was like, hey, I don't want to wait till I'm 60 to design something cool. I want this all to happen now. And I I remember I would make my models and I would be so proud. Like it was really about the form of the building. And then I had my review maybe halfway through and the teacher's like, hey, you never like photograph your models as if you're inside the building. And I was like, yeah, I mean, don't you see how cool the shell of this building is? So I was more concerned with making the models and kind of this idea of developing form and form making than I was in what it was like to be inside of buildings, which ironically is the exact opposite approach that I do now. And then I would go to the library. I'm dating myself a little here, but just about when Google was, or Yahoo was coming about or whatever, the beginning of the internet. But I would go to the library and look through all these design magazines. And I started to see kind of these designers from Europe on the cover of magazines, and they were young and it looked cool. And for lack of a better word, it just looked a little more glamorous than architecture. And I was like, hey, I think I can do this. I think I want to do this. Because this seems cool and faster and fun, and I don't have to wait until I'm old to design something. So these two kind of moments in architecture school when I started to really question whether I wanted to be an architect. And so I went to my teacher who was actually an industrial designer, and I had a chat with him about this. And he said, hey man, like you have like a year left of architecture school. I think you should finish. And then you could go, if you want to go back and do something else and be a different type of designer, you can do that. But why don't you keep at it? And so that's what I did. I finished out, but I knew at the time that I thought maybe my passion was elsewhere. And this was probably the first time in my life that I realized maybe I didn't want to be an architect.
Isn't that funny, though? I mean, you might be realizing that you don't want to be an architect, but none of that education went to waste. Like, it still seeped in and informed you, and I'm sure you use it every day.
Yeah, architecture school is weird. It's not what you think, in some ways, depending on where you go. You learn technical things, of course, but you also learn, it's the beginning of learning how to be creative in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Well, and your impression as a youth was that you don't get to design anything till you're an old man. But in actuality, you're probably doing a lot of drafting and designing, just not really seeing your own buildings built until you're an old man.
Maybe my ego got the hold of me.
You were like, no, sure. I need to influence the outside world now.
Yeah, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. And I remember in Buffalo, we were always like looking what was happening in California and the kind of the work that was being done. And, it seemed more avant-garde and maybe a little bit edgier than what, was happening where we were. And a lot of this too is, I think you guys make a good point. It's the perception of someone that's 20 years old or 19 years old and just still trying to figure it out. So I don't know what's truth and what's just my perception at the time.
Sure. But I mean, it almost doesn't matter because the perception of the 20-year-old is what led you on the path. So the next step on your path was to get a degree in industrial design, correct?
Well, actually, I worked. So after architecture, in the summers, I worked for the building department where I grew up, and I was a building inspector. So I would go around and see, like swimming pools and decks being built and additions and houses, and I would kind of go in and see if they were basically building them the right way, which was a very difficult job for a young kid in architecture school or just finished with architecture school. Because, the contractors were like, who's this petulant little kid telling us how to build
Who's coming
something?
here to like find all our flaws and tell us what we did wrong?
Yeah, nobody likes the inspector.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like a most hated job, right? It's like right up there with the DMV people, I think. But it was good in a few ways for me because I had to get out there and I had to learn how to be, I was ironically a relatively shy kid, which is hard to believe, I guess, at this point. But I had to learn how to be assertive. I learned a lot about how buildings are put together, which you don't always learn in architecture school. And I saved money. Basically, I saved for my first year at Art Center. I think that was like a pivotal year. I think I might have been one of the youngest, if not the youngest, one of the youngest licensed building inspectors in the state of New York. I passed the civil service exam while I was still in architecture school. So, it's funny. It's a year and a half of my life that's so different now. But, I think driving around from project to project, I just knew that I wanted to do something more and kind of those library sessions. I think I had quite of ambition, at the time. And so I saved up money and I looked at a few different schools, and I went out to Art Center, which when you grow up in Rochester and Buffalo it might as well be half a world away, truthfully. But, I was kind of taken by the building. It's this, just long, black, amazing international style structure. It's all white on the inside and kind of raw and blank. And I just kind of had this instinct that this is what I should do and this is where I should go. And I guess I'm still here in Pasadena today.
Yeah, you never left. But let's talk about that. So from studying at Art Center to the professional world, what were the first few steps like for you in terms of becoming a real deal designer as opposed to a design student?
Yeah, I think I took Art Center very, very seriously, maybe too seriously. I was too wrapped up in it, perhaps too committed isn't the word, but maybe a little bit too driven. So it was kind of a tough time, I would say.
What do you mean too driven? Like too hard on yourself?
Yeah, sure. I think I struggle. We can start the deep stuff now, but yeah, I totally think I've had to learn to be less difficult on myself. And I grew up, I think, with kind of expectations, and it never dawned on me that I wouldn't be able to do the things that I wanted to do. And I think at times in my life, that's been a difficult and challenging journey. And then also when you go to architecture school and then when you go to Art Center, especially at the time that I was there, they also teach you these things too. You're taught to try to be perfect, and you're taught to be super rigorous, and you're taught that above all else, you need to get this right. So that was kind of my Art Center experience. So on one hand, it was incredibly crucial to the tools and the skills that I gained. And I would say my ability made tremendous leaps, but it was also hard because, I was chasing down, I think, unreasonable expectations of myself.
Mm-hmm.
When my career finally happened after Art Center, I started the career right out of Art Center. I was getting in magazines, and, magazines were still the press that everyone wanted back then. And I never felt satisfied. I was like, okay, well, why, that's great, but why isn't it this magazine, and why, so it took me a long time to kind of slow down and say, hey, this is okay. You're doing well. Cause I just constantly had this feeling that I wasn't doing enough. It wasn't going fast enough. And all the expectations I think I had built up for myself.
Yeah. Well, you're not good enough, Cory Grosser.
None of us are,
No, I mean, that is hard though. And I feel like that was my college experience too. It's where I learned how to be so hard on myself that I was actually less useful to the world, you know? And then you have to figure out, okay, let me back this up a little bit. No person is capable of perfection. I'm only capable of doing my best. Where is my best? Because if I push myself beyond it, I'm breaking down. And if I push myself up to it, I'm growing. But finding that line is hard and usually requires crossing it a few times in order to know where it is.
I think, I talk about this stuff now, but this is a very recent this realization for me is 5 years old, not 15 years old.
You were disparaging old men before, but I'm telling you, maturity is worthwhile. It's got real value.
Right. But, on the flip side, it's tough because it also kind of propelled my early career. And then, I just had a belief and a confidence that I could do it the way that I wanted to do it. And I think that happened. But, it's also cool. And I tell my students now, figure out what you want to do and then work towards it, but also be open to, new opportunities and new things that kind of may unravel themselves in front of you.
Mm.
Like as designers, we can't design everything. We can't design the unfolding of our lives. And that's a tough lesson for somebody who likes to have influence over every aspect of the built world. And
how do you know that was me? Yeah, sure.
Okay, but let's talk about your professional practice. Tell our listeners the types of work you do in Cory Grosser and Associates and what kinds of projects have been milestones in the evolution of Cory Grosser.
Yeah, so to go backwards a little bit, because I think the beginning of the studio is kind of in between Art Center and the beginning of the studio it sets the foundations for what we're doing today. But, I knew the day I got to Art Center that I wanted to have my own studio and kind of be an independent designer. And that was the path I was going to take. I was really interested in furniture and lighting and kind of similar lifestyle products because I studied architecture and I wanted to be an architect. And then I was really into products, like electronics and small things. But I thought that furniture was kind of it was a good meeting spot between those two kind of extremes. Mm-hmm. And so when I graduated from Art Center, I applied for the Salone Satellite at the Milan Furniture Fair, which is still kind of it's a place where you apply, and then if you're accepted, you get a small booth and you bring your stuff there and you see what happens. And
it's a hot showcase of emerging designers.
Yes. And I think it was only the third one. So to date myself a little bit, I think it was the third installment. So I got a part-time job at Art Center working in the shop so I could build my pieces. And I kind of did my best to get everything there. And, it was a really big deal for me because I had never been out of North America. It was my first time in Europe or anywhere really outside of Canada. And I remember my parents came and my brother came. My ex-wife was there too. We kind of came out of the subway right next to the Duomo. So the first thing I saw of Europe was the side of the Duomo. And I'll never forget that feeling.
Wow.
Because it was overwhelming, but also super cool. And I was super excited. I was very eager. Anyway, I put my furniture there and I designed some big like audio speakers. I think the people with booths next to me still to this day probably hate my guts because I forgot all the CDs. And I only had like 3 CDs. So for the entire 8 days, I played the same thing over and over and over again. So
wait, what did you play? I want to know.
Oh, it was like Groove Armada and other things like that were like heavy. Like
so, we're talking like 2002,
exactly.
Something like this.
Yes, exactly. 2002. You got it precisely. And what happened was my furniture. It was a little bit naive. It was super American. I would say. It was kind of inspired by the 50s and 60s. It was super retro, but what happened with the music is kind of young students and whatever, they would come and hang out in my booth. And, the booth just generated there was always people in it. And so that kind of helped. And
that's trade show currency.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Much to the dismay of my neighbors that had to hear Groove Armada for 8 days straight. So you put your stuff out there and that you hope that someone important in the Italian design industry is going to come to your booth and say something to you. That's what's really going on at this show. You're just hopeful. And that's what happened. Like a few people came by and I remember at the time, it's so silly now, but I remember thinking, yeah, I got this. This is going to be easy, and 10 years of like carrying my portfolio around Italy, I realized it wasn't nearly as easy as I thought it was going to be. But I guess in a way that gave me confidence and it said, okay, I can do what I want to do. It might take a while and it might not be easy, but I think I can do this. And it was really important for me at the time. There weren't a lot of American designers going to Europe and trying to work with the European companies. That was my dream. That's what I really wanted to do. I wanted to be, a global designer. And I guess in some weird way, I was thinking back to those magazine articles about these other designers that I read about and saying, hey, can I do that? And so, that's the first stage of my career. And to this day, it's evolved. But, we still do that type of work. We still, make design furniture and lighting and accessories, for royalties. So that's still a big part of our work.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that with us. And yeah, I'm sure your booth mates or booth neighbors had Groove Armada carved into their subconscious. But you bring up something that I think is important, which is that there is a glamorous appeal to being an internationally recognized design star. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I just feel like rather than trying to pretend like we're not feeling that pull of the glamorous life, we should probably just acknowledge it. But here's what I want to get to with you, because you're doing all these different types of projects, which is also very glamorous, but you're also a very passionate pedagogue. You're an educator, and you have been since you were a student. Am I right?
Well, I think about 5 years into my career, I started teaching at Art Center.
Okay.
And I think when I left Art Center, like I said, it was a pretty hard time for me, actually. I didn't think I would go back. I thought I maybe would visit someday, but I didn't know I would be back in 5 years. That was really a shock. And I remember walking in the building on my first day and smelling clay, because when they design cars, they use this modeling clay and they put the clay in these warming ovens so they can sculpt it. And I remember walking in and just smelling that clay and thinking, like, what are you doing here? Like, why are you back here?
Cory, we revisit the challenging chapters in our life so that we can remake them in a more productive way.
Maybe. I'm not sure. I'm not
there
sure.
you are. You're back to design the student experience.
But I felt like I grew a lot at Art Center. So I was like, okay, let's do this. And Art Center has, we've done this class with Bernhardt Design where I think there's been about 10 of them, where Jerry Helling comes to the school and we run a class, and basically those students get to have their pieces put into Bernhardt's line. And there's been a lot of successful pieces over the year. So I had an opportunity to co-teach this class with a gentleman named David McCarsky, who's the chair of the department. And it seemed like a pretty cool opportunity because, at Art Center, it's also a professional it's a professional curriculum, or it's just, we're supposed to train professionals, right? So part of going in there was, hey, I'm working, like I'm out here, I'm doing it. I can share some of this. I have things to add here. And that was, I guess, the beginning of my idea of being a teacher, is that, okay, I can share what I'm doing in the studio and these things can kind of commingle a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that's a really valuable part of the curriculum, is just the real life professional experience that you can bring to the table, in addition to helping to sort of grow and nurture the creative expression and the design thinking and all of the tools and skills. That window of being able to say, here's what it's like out in the real world. Here's what clients are going to be expecting. Here's how you navigate this tricky scenario.
Yeah, that's one of I would say my favorite parts about teaching.
Really?
Yeah. I love if a student asks me, like, how am I going to make money? Like, how am I going to live?
Man, I wish I had asked that when I was in school.
With this career. And I say, okay, well, here's your choices, and here's how. So that is a cool part. I think teaching is hard for me. The studio has gotten busier and we've grown, and I'm a single dad now. I have 2 beautiful young girls. So it's a lot to balance. So, I maybe don't teach as much as I used to, but, I usually have 1 or 2 classes per term.
Okay.
It is, I guess, integrated with what I feel professionally or think about professionally. And I really just try to help the students get ready to be the best creative people that they can be, to kind of unlock their own creative power. I don't believe in teaching students process, and if you do this, if you start at A and do all of this and get to B, this is what's going to happen. But I believe, hey, like, what do you think you're good at? What are you passionate about? What do you want to do? And how can I help you develop that? So that I think that's my approach to teaching. And as we talked about before, I think it's changed a little bit now. I'm more empathetic to my students, and I'm a little bit easier teacher than I was in the early years. I'm not demanding my students make perfect things like I used to try to make, but
you're not as hard on them as you were on yourself.
Yeah. But I think that took 10 years of teaching to get there too.
Sure.
So I think teaching's really changed for me in the last 5 years.
I'm going to ask you about Dubai, but before we even fly halfway across the world, I want to go back to this idea of empathy. And you said, like, you are becoming an easier teacher. You feel like you've accepted, I guess, your place in the world. I just want to know, like, what triggered that. I'm really curious to hear more about the shift in your perception of everything.
Well, I got divorced and spent a year in therapy. I think if you're truly a creative person, are really these things different? Are you one person at work and this idea of being creative, and then you go home and you're a different person? I think if you're really driven to be creative and truly a creative person, I think these things are vastly intertwined. I think it would be disingenuous to say that like these things are separate. I think they're completely aligned. And it's one of the difficult things about being a creative person, whether you're an artist or a musician or an architect or whatever you are, like these things, it becomes, it's not only what you do, it's also part of who you are. And I think they are quite well connected.
They're so well connected. And it's interesting to me that like getting to that place of understanding that, and then the journey of fully integrating all those aspects of yourself is a lifelong journey, but finally recognizing that integration is the goal.
Yeah, integration is a nice word. I think when you become a parent too, this can also happen. So, it doesn't always have to be a crisis, but I think if you are a parent or you choose to be a parent, I think that can really change your perspective, and how you want your kids to navigate the world and what you want for them. These ideas of the expectations that I put myself, I really try not to put that on my kids, because I definitely want them to be a little bit, I would say, more integrated than I was, if you want to use that word. It's a double-edged sword, it's the thing that propelled my career, I would say, but it also caused me difficulties too.
Yeah, if you put the wrong gas in the tank, you might still get there, but you wear the machine out on the way.
Yeah. So, I think of myself as a designer, and I think of myself as a father, and I think about myself as a teacher, and I just do my best day by day to kind of balance these things as best as I possibly can.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you're doing a pretty good job.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I hope so.
All right. So we're back in the plane and we're flying to Dubai. So what are you doing there? What is going on with Dubai?
Let me back up a little bit and just kind of set the groundwork for Dubai.
Yeah.
We were a product design studio. We are furniture and products. Started out with Milan, and then early in my career, I started doing some design strategy work. I got a good opportunity at Ford. So in the beginning of my, as I was doing kind of this European, independent designer, when I was on that trek, I started working kind of for bigger companies as a consultant, as a creative consultant, as what I would call a design DNA consultant. And the studio split into two modes. So we had this furniture and it's kind of, let's say, small company mode. So, a lot of the furniture companies in Europe are still family owned. I mean, they're kind of getting bigger now, but let's say at that time they were really family owned. And then I was taking some of the lessons that I was working on in furniture, and I was trying to apply them to big companies. So we worked for Ford, and we worked for Hyundai, and we worked for Bentley Motors. And then I started working for Disney. And in the beginning, it was a lot of car companies, because there's a lot of car companies, or there were a lot of design studios in Southern California. So, that became kind of this thing. So we had kind of this strategy side, and then we had the furniture side. And then probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I had been doing some both strategy projects and kind of design projects for Disney. And they asked if I thought I could design a small brainstorming space next to Disneyland in a building that Frank Gehry designed, actually. And although I wasn't a working architect, and I had to go way back to being a building inspector to remember how things were put together, I was like, okay, maybe I'm ready to try this out. Let's see. And so I was kind of tapping into that, being a kid and wanting to design, spaces. So we did it, and it came out pretty good. It came out nice. And then they asked us to do another and another and another, and it kind of snowballed. And so before I knew it, the studio was basically split into these three areas, which is the way we work now. So we have space design, furniture and products, and then, strategy work. So anyway, over the last 5 years, this has been the big change in my life, and the life of the studio is doing mostly interior architectures. We've done stores and some exhibition design, corporate headquarters and whatnot. But, it was kind of a mid-career change, I would say. And I got a call maybe a year and a half ago or so, and it was a very strange call. It was one of these calls where, like, I thought it was a prank, really, or someone. I thought it was, someone trying to sell me the king of Nambia was releasing his gold, and you should send $1 million here. So I almost hung up the phone, but for some reason I was like, let me just hear this out. And it was a gentleman from Dubai who wanted to make a partnership with a Western designer, and specifically a designer from California, to be involved in creating a new studio in Dubai to do architecture. And over a year and a half of kind of thinking about it and working out the details, this is what's happening. So we'll have an office in a really nice area of Dubai, and kind of one of these two giant towers that still, when I see the photos, makes me laugh a little bit.
Wait, okay, so you're opening an office in Dubai based on a blind date phone call? Like, what happened after that? You guys have to fall in love before you get into business
you just
together.
have to have
How did
courage.
you know this was a fit?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that
or
too.
blind stupidity, one of the two. In 5 years, we could have this podcast again, and I'll tell you which one it was.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're creating this office in Dubai, which wasn't really, we're pretty busy in the California studio, and we're really trying to grow and trying to do more and to try to do the best we can. So this wasn't really a plan or an ambition in any way. It was just an opportunity that presented itself. And we talk a lot in the studio about, we have a very tight DNA, like our own DNA. So, if you hire our studio, there's a certain philosophy and there's a certain aesthetic and a certain kind of set of tools and rules that you probably have to match up with what you want to do, or we probably won't be a good fit for each other.
Mm-hmm.
So part of this was, can we take what we're doing and our philosophy and our aesthetic style and our ideas about design, and can we jump cultures and see, like, what will it be like someplace else? So in that sense, it's really exciting and quite challenging to figure out how to have a studio so far away, but still have it retain kind of the DNA and also kind of the quality that we try every day to achieve.
Well, that sounds very exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys want to come to Dubai with me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I was just
Absolutely.
talking to somebody the other day about that.
So Dubai Design Week is November.
I know.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cool stuff going on
And
there.
I'm giving a couple lectures, and we'll see how it goes.
I'm in.
I want to jump into your creative process, because you just mentioned that your office has a specific type of DNA. So how would you characterize your design philosophy? What is that DNA?
Well, I think, since we work on projects of many different scales, I think it would be, my idea was, okay, we can do all these types of projects, but there has to be some thread that kind of holds things together, or this just isn't going to work. So, we have it's I would say it's like a California minimal kind of idea, if I have to put air quotes around it, but we're super influenced by California. And I think California is an amazing place to be a designer. And I feel very lucky to be working here. But also we're trying to do, it's like minimalism plus, right? We're trying to figure out what the essential things are, and then do one thing that makes people smile, or one thing that's a little bright, one thing that's, for lack of a better word, that has California sunshine, So it starts out quite stark and quite austere, and then, we give it some sunshine. And I think that that's the zone as a studio that we try and operate in.
Yeah, I love that picture you painted, because I don't want any extra bells and whistles, any bullshit. At the same time, I don't want something that's totally cold and austere and devoid of personality. So where is that land? And I like your description of something that's minimal, but with a little bit of California sunshine.
It's also a real thing too. When you grow up in Western New York, they have seasonal affective disorder, which is a real thing. And then out here, it's sunny most days. It's hard not to, I think it has a good spirit.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And it seems like it would be easy to connect to.
Yeah, I had this, I bought myself a Paul Smith suit. This is years ago, but I was so proud when I got this suit, and I don't know, it had like the Paul Smith stripe on the inside. The cut is pretty minimal. It's pretty classic silhouette, but then it had this colorful stripe on the inside. And I always love that idea that, it's minimal, but you have this one thing that maybe you don't notice at first, or maybe you do, that makes it different. It's a little bit more. It's like kind of minimalism plus kind of philosophy. And I think my head is pretty chaotic. I think, I'm a very messy person, and I think minimalism to me is kind of like an ideal state. But I also have that kind of I want to kind of try to introduce that warm reality and realize it can't all be perfect all the time.
So that begs the question then, Cory, what is your colorful stripe on the inside?
Oh, each project, we do it individually. We try to...
No, Cory Grosser's colorful stripe.
Oh.
Yeah, I think it goes all the way back to the Halloween costumes. You have this dress up personality.
I try. I hope it's my smile.
That's good. That's a good one.
I can be serious about business, of course, and I can be very serious about design. But in the end, I think it is this business, like every business, maybe is really in the end about people, and I think you have to be nice. Be nice to people, and I think a lot of our clients, I think of them as friends or at least very close to friends, and I think our studio culture is one of we're serious and our style is serious, but we're, I think, in general, a happy and a friendly bunch. And it's really important that that's how the studio operates, and that's how our team works. And I hope that the world kind of feels that.
Well, I think that's admirable. I want to get a sense of, this is maybe more pragmatic than personality, but in the studio, how does the project flow? Can you give us an overview of the process?
Yeah, a little bit.
How do you arrive at and edit your ideas into proposals and then into finished projects?
I think we've made a pretty big jump in the type of projects we do and just how busy it is. We're still a very small team. But in the early days, students out of Art Center or other places would come and they would stay for a year. And it was kind of like, like other studios that do furniture, I suppose, where it was basically young designers kind of helping the projects along. And, but I was involved in every minute decision that was ever made. And it's different now because that's not responsible. It's not possible the way to work on all of these different projects at all of these different scales and expect that I could do a good job. So, about 5 years ago, I changed the studio to more of an associates model. So now we have, I have a great team. They're very skilled. They're very talented. And each kind of person has their own specialty, I would say. So now my job is different. My job is kind of course, is to be the face of the studio and to try to close deals and do that business part of it, but also to keep kind of the creative direction and these aesthetic philosophies and the quality and try to kind of control that everything that goes out the door that we're happy with and that we're proud of. And, so that's kind of how my role has changed. So it's an interesting question for me because my job function or my role has changed a lot. So a lot of it is, I think, working with my team and making sure that the things that we do are really good for the client, and they're also they fit us, and that we're all a good match, and that we think of our clients as collaborators and partners, but we look for synergy between the parties. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a lot about reviewing work. I work in a very iterative way, meaning I like to see things. I'm not really good at imagining everything in my head and kind of figuring it all in my head. I think my talent really is in my eyes. So I have to see things to kind of decide things, which I think for my team can be quite frustrating. And also probably it costs the studio a lot of money because we have to spend a lot of time making drawings and renderings and diagrams to make these decisions that to me are often very visual. I strongly believe that design, it's a lot of things, but it is also still a visual art form. And I think the way you perceive things, the way you see things and feel things, I think are super important. And that's the way I see my role. And that's kind of how I suppose projects kind of work and flow through our studio.
Is there something about the process that still, after all these years, hasn't gotten completely worked out? That still drives you absolutely crazy or poses a challenge every time or keeps you awake at night with worry? Or are you pretty dialed in now? I don't know if anybody's ever really dialed in.
Definitely am not dialed in. That's an interesting question. I suppose if we're just talking about design, I'm very confident in our abilities as a studio. So I don't worry about the quality of the finished product. So I know if we're getting if a project comes into the studio, I know that when it goes out the door, that we will all be happy with it. I have no problem, and I can't believe I'm saying this on air, so to speak. But if a project isn't right, I'll call the client and say, I'm sorry, it's not right. I'm going to have to give it to you in 2 days, even if they're mad. And I've done that several times because I really care about design, and I think my team cares about design. And if you come to us, we're a small team, we're friendly, but we are going to make it as best as we possibly can. And it won't move out the door until it's ready. So that can be frustrating. I think with architecture in particular, one of the challenges that I think we face as a team is, I guess, this idea of what they call value engineering, VE, meaning it's like you have money for a hamburger, but you want filet. And then the misconception is it's the designer's job to make filet out of hamburger, but it's not. Like filet is filet and it costs what filet costs and hamburger costs what hamburger costs. And we can make you a fancy hamburger if you like, but we can't, we're not magicians. So a lot of it is, especially in architecture, a lot of it is driven by budget. That's one of the hardest things for us. And it's also like trying to teach clients the expectation of like, I understand what you want, but you can't have exactly what you want unless you're willing to pay for it. We can't, we can't make magic out of something. So that's a challenge.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel you.
Kind of makes me think of like knockoff furniture, where it's like there's somebody out there who will totally produce that for you at a cheaper cost, but like at what real cost? Like, it falls apart in a year or it's really uncomfortable and it's, you get what you pay for.
Well, yeah, and it undermines original design in a big way economically. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a hot button topic, right? I think people probably don't realize, let's say we might design 50 products, 50 pieces of furniture to get 3 of them to market, right? And that also goes for the companies. Some of this R&D to make new products can be very expensive. It's very time consuming and it takes a lot of effort. And I think sometimes that gets undermined by, furniture that's copied. And also if you make a portion of your living off of royalties, you're really conscious of that. If Eames designed something in 1955 or whatever, I want the Eames things and we won't put, a copy of an Eames chair in a project. That would never happen in our studio because it circumvents the process and it's almost a self-defeating kind of idea.
Oh, very self-defeating.
And that happens all the time.
Yeah. I know. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a restaurant and I have to turn the chair upside down to know if I'm sitting on a knockoff or not.
I do that too.
The waiter's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm just checking this chair." I do it constantly.
I always am so excited about Emiko though, because they like stamp the back of their chair. You don't even need to flip it over. You know what you're sitting in.
Right.
Right away.
Yeah, I think there's this, there's an important idea here. Like, I don't think design should just be for people, with money in any way. But, if you want an original thing or you really want design, perhaps you have to save up for it a little bit or just put some money aside or, find something that's a little bit cheaper from your favorite designer or whatever. But that I think that can be important. This kind of idea of, okay, I really want this. I really want this piece of design and I'm going to save up for it. And then I'm going to keep it for a long time. I mean, that in the end is really what sustainability is all about, right? If I keep a chair or I hand a chair down to my kids and I've had it for 50 years, there's nothing more sustainable than that. No recycled product can be more sustainable than that.
Yeah.
Oh, I totally agree.
Absolutely.
And some of the favorite objects in my house were my grandmother's. Yeah. And they just have this like sort of, they have a vintage vibe because they were my grandmother's, but then they were my grandmother's, so they have a personal connection to me. And then they also give my decor this sort of more timeless aesthetic as opposed to something that's super trendy and disposable. So I think it just adds depth.
Yeah, that's I think Don Norman would call that like your reflective memory. So part of the value of the object is based on your history with it or where it came from or where you found it. And that can be a very important, it does build emotional connections between us and our things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about goals. You've designed lots of things and now you're opening an office in Dubai, which is very exciting. But is there a goal out there that you haven't yet realized? And what is it?
Yeah. So what we're trying to do, because we have these 3 phases to the studio, we're basically trying to help brands and companies, as a creative force, meaning I think the future of our studio is maybe we design your space and we design some products for you, and then we do your catalog, and a little bit more of a holistic approach to design. It's super important. Like in the studio, we say it's multidisciplinary, but lots of studios say they're multidisciplinary. So we're kind of using more of this term about being a holistic design studio. And so the projects that I think we're looking for, and I think what'll happen hopefully over the next 5 years, is we'll get more and more types of projects like that. We've never done a restaurant, and I think that would be a really good project for us if we can get to design the menu, and and maybe we can design the flatware, and so any of these projects that I say are more holistic. I think in the coming years, to hint ahead, I think you'll see more hospitality projects with us, and I think you might see us do work in the hotel industry. I have a personal passion about the airline industry, so we're kind of looking for ways to tackle aircraft interiors and projects like that. So anyway, I think that's where we're trying as a team. We're trying to move the studio into. I always see us as a small team, but working on maybe more holistic projects.
So I know you're very connected with your work, and you and your work are kind of one and the same, but do you have any personal goals?
Oh, I think, my main personal goal is to be the best dad I can be, I would say. I think, I want my kids to grow up happy and fulfilled. And I think that's one of my biggest personal goals. And, I'm super focused on, that's just kind of the way my life is now. So that's, seriously important to me.
Yeah.
I also want to, I think I want to try to live as balanced a life as I possibly can, kind of trying to manage all of these different things that are going on. So yeah, I think those are my 2 personal goals, I would say.
Those are good goals.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So speaking of projects that you have coming up, is there a new project you have that you want our listeners to know about?
Yeah, so this month is Orgatech, which is the big European contract furniture show. So we're introducing a new product for a Belgian company called Buzzy Space, called Buzzy Mood, which is an acoustic product. We had a little preview at NeoCon in June, and it's launching officially this month.
Is this it's like wall panels that are acoustic panels, but it's like moss?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so there's basically this small moss that's they're like little balls, and they're harvested from the forest, the ground and forest in Scandinavia, and these little balls have kind of acoustic properties, and you'll see them in offices. Like you'll walk into an office and you'll see a green wall, and it might be made from these, but this is one of the first products that you can buy as a product that has the moss integrated. And it's pretty cool because it not only does it have acoustic properties, but it also has humidity control properties. So it kind of it helps you figure out if your air quality has if you have the right humidity. And in Orgatech now we're introducing different fabric panels and other types of panels. So if you're not into moss or kind of want to mix and match, I think it's going to do really well in the marketplace. I'm hopeful.
Well, that's exciting. So where can our listeners find you on the web and social media and keep tabs on all of your upcoming projects?
Yeah, sure. So it's pretty easy. It's CoryGrosser.com, and our Instagram is @CoryGrosser.
That is pretty easy. I love it. Well, thank you for sharing all your colorful stripes with us.
Absolutely. Thank you guys. I'm super psyched to do this, and I'm kind of honored to be. I know you guys have a long list of really amazing personalities on this podcast, and I'm really thankful for the opportunity to share a bit.
Thanks, Cory.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your personal story with us, because I always feel like work is just one part of our lives. So when we can kind of integrate work and personal, we can get a better holistic view of how a creative has to operate in the world.
Well, I think you guys do a really good job pulling it out of people too. So thank you.
Awesome. I really, really like that he grew up in a home that celebrated Halloween costumes.
Halloween is so fun. I have bittersweet feelings about Halloween, like mixed feelings, because it's my birthday.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So it's wonderful and exciting, but also terrifying and reminds me that I'm going to die. So there's
Why
that.
does it remind you you're going to die?
Well, every birthday means you're a year older.
Oh, wow. You just got way morbid.
Well, Halloween is there's zombies and ghosts and
it is death oriented, sure.
Yeah, it's but makes it fun. It's fun death, so it's not as bad, I guess. Anyway, yes, I thought it was really fun that they did that, and I love that they won trophies for it.
Well, I agree with him though that making as a kid is an important activity because it really unlocks channels in your brain. It helps you feel a tangible sense of accomplishment. Mm-hmm. Getting trophies is awesome, but sleeping in a boat bed that your granddad built, that's so rad.
It's so cool. It's way better than one of those like plastic beds.
Way better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it had a built-in toy box. It's so cool.
I know. And his granddad built it.
I know.
I love everything about that.
I do too. I really appreciated him talking about this shift in his thinking, not only on a personal level, but how it affected him as, a professional, as a designer, running his own business, but also as a teacher. I think we tend to think a lot of times when people have their own businesses that they are their brand, right? But we don't think too much about like everybody else and how them as a person and how they think and their thought patterns and their changes and emotions affect how they live their life. And that bleeds into what they do for a living and how they approach every single decision they make in their whole life.
Absolutely. I'd be really interested to do an informal survey of designers and creatives and figure out how many of them were way too hard on themselves and had to find that sense of balance. I know we can be extra critical because that's what we're training ourselves to do, to have that, critical eye. He said this is a breakthrough after some breakdowns that he got to only about 5 years ago. And mm-hmm. I totally had to do the same thing. And I talked about it in school, but no, I didn't really arrive at that until I went through my own sort of personal and professional collapses and divorce and therapy and all of that. But I feel like we should be teaching our design students how to not accidentally become too critical of themselves.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a balance though, right? Because a lot of times when you're in your late teens, early 20s, or even mid 20s, you're still super tied to ego mm-hmm. and caring what everybody else thinks.
Yes.
And so there's part of that like you want to kind of curb the ego, but also help with the critical thinking, but boost confidence at the same time. It's teachers, man, they just have it really tough. They've got to balance all of these things because kids at that age have a lot going on in their brain.
Yeah. Parents too.
Yeah.
Teachers have a parental role in that way, and parents have a professorial role at the same time. So Cory's doing both, and I was really touched. You could hear his voice soften when he talked about his goal being a good dad.
Oh yeah, really it was so cute.
Yeah,
I know, it's so sweet, but it's nice to hear him say that's a personal goal. I think we as parents, I just feel like we all want to be the best we can be for our kids, but we don't really talk about that. We just do, mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it is important to get out there and tell people like, hey, like this is really important to me. Like I care about my kids, but I want to make sure that I'm giving them like the best life that they can have, but also teaching them all of these important life lessons. And that's something I want to be good at. That's my job as a human.
How are you doing? I think you're doing pretty good.
How am I doing?
Yeah. What's your scorecard, Jamie?
I don't even know. I mean,
are you mom extraordinary?
No, definitely not. I gave myself a low bar. And I was like, okay, if this kid doesn't die in the first 5 years, I'm successful, right? Because you just need to keep them alive at that point. But then like it starts to get more complicated because there's all these emotions and all of this other stuff. And then it becomes like society has influence and culture has influence. And then it's just like, holy crap. So we're all kind of just doing the best we can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's all a case specific kind of deal too. Like he was saying he doesn't want to issue any dogma or formulas to his design students because he doesn't believe that like if you take A and follow through B and C that you're going to automatically get, the right answer. He's just trying to help his students unlock their own problem-solving skills and creative expression. And parenting, I mean, there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of parallels in parenting as well. And nobody can tell you the right way to parent your kids.
Yeah. They'll all try.
Oh, yeah, that's for sure. And they'll all judge you.
More opinions and more advice than you ever thought you could get in your life. But yeah, you can only really do what you can do. I think, most people are really trying to just make the best decision or the decision they think is the best at the time for their kids. And sometimes it's difficult for the kids, but also difficult for students to have the confidence to trust their own intuition or follow their own path and not ask for a formula because everybody wants a formula. Like, oh, how did you become successful? Tell me your road, like A, B, C, D. What did you do? And they think if they replicate that, then they'll then become successful as well. And maybe they would, but like for the most part, we all have our own path and our own experiences and we have to follow that. And that's hard because you don't know what lies ahead. There is no formula.
He didn't know he was going to open an office in Dubai.
Yeah.
I love stories that begin with a phone call where they thought it might have been a prank.
Oh my gosh, who said that? Was it Josh Higgins when he was like, the Obama called me? And I was like,
right.
Like the guy from Obama's office called and was like, hey, we want you to design this thing. And he almost hung up on him.
Yeah.
You guys should go back and listen to that episode. It was a good one.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, I thought that was a great conversation and I appreciated him being honest. And also, I just think it's good advice to like follow your path and I don't know, be open.
Seek balance. Don't be afraid to fail. How many cliches can you come up with? No,
I don't know. I could go all day.
I think we're good.
Yeah. Thanks for listening. Please go to cleverpodcast.com to see images of Cory's work. Or you can click the link in the details of this episode on your podcast app. Subscribe to Clever on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you're in the mood, please rate and review us. It helps us in ways that are more profound than you will ever know. We also love chatting with you on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find us at Clever Podcast. Clever is created, produced, and hosted by us, Amy Devers and Jamie Derringer, a.k.a. 2VDE Media, with editing by Jenny Josephson and music by L1011. Clever is proudly distributed by Design Milk.